Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, June 11th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about a couple of traditions in college football that are getting a little bit messed up this upcoming year that I want to break down for you all. Then we're going to get into the transfer portal. It sounds like we are fully done with the transfer portal. There are a couple of stragglers still out there, but definitely a lot of the work has been done there, and I want to break down who actually won the portal compared to who you might have thought won the portal. Then we'll get into a little talk around the Big Ten. We'll get into win totals and Cinderellas just like we did yesterday. Before we finish it up with a Top 10 Tuesday, we'll break down the biggest domino players in college football, which essentially is just players that can affect much more than just their team or their conference. They can affect the entirety of college football. So I want to break that down today. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun interactive experience here, and that's always fun for the both of us. Again, that's GSMCPodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's start talking about these college football traditions that are a little bit under attack this upcoming year. There's definitely a lot of people that, it's a changing world in college football, and there's a lot of different things that are kind of going out the window in terms of tradition. There's some rivalries we're leaving behind with some different conference realignment stuff. There's some regionality we're leaving behind for sure. There's some different things that definitely make this sport special that are kind of things of the past at this point. But there are two things I want to narrow in on today that I think, at least in 2024, could be under a little bit of scrutiny and definitely are not what they are meant to be. And I want to start with one of the coolest traditions in all of college football, the whiteout. The whiteout is one of the coolest atmospheres that we have in college football. It's one of the coolest things that happens in college football on a yearly basis. It's absolutely remarkable. The fans are off the charts. It's just one of those atmospheres that, is on your bucket list. Absolutely one that I want to go to before, in my lifetime, absolutely, no doubt about it. But for Penn State, the whiteout is such a big deal, right? It's one of the best atmospheres. It's probably one of the biggest weekends in that city across the entire year, if I'm being totally honest. And in State College that day, it's always electric. The problem is the last couple of years, it hasn't quite been what it could be. After the COVID season where they didn't have a whiteout, obviously, they've played Auburn, Minnesota, and Iowa on their whiteout games. Obviously, that's because you got to play whiteout at night to make the atmosphere that much better. You got to play it at certain times of the day, and Ohio State, Michigan, those types of games have been taken by big noon kickoff for those kickoff times at, noon. So it doesn't necessarily help to have a whiteout in the, beginning of the day. They want to have it at night, and the Auburn game itself was actually pretty fun, to be totally honest with you, but it didn't necessarily have the same atmosphere because you want it to be a conference matchup. Frankly, if it's not Ohio State or Michigan, it's pointless. I think the whiteout has to be one of those two games, and they have the privilege of having those games at home. One year it's Ohio State, one year it's Michigan. Making those night games does not seem like the hardest thing in the world to me. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it's a lot harder than I'm thinking. But in all of these TV contracts, it feels like there's almost a laziness about it where we can't just get in a room and figure out, this is what the fans want, this is what pretty much everyone wants, find a way to put this game at night. You can still have big noon kickoff there, but the actual broadcast will be in Michigan against Oregon, which is actually the same weekend as Ohio State, Penn State, which is likely where you want this game. But as of right now, it looks like Illinois or UCLA could end up being the whiteout, which is obviously not exactly what they want up there in State College, and it's definitely something that kind of ruins this moment. The whiteout is one of the coolest, one of the best traditions that we have. It's one of the best, nights in college football that we get every single year, and I think leaving it on the table, leaving it to an Illinois or a UCLA, no disrespect to either of those teams, the fact is it should be a night game on national television against Ohio State or Michigan. That's just bar none, that's absolutely the way it should be. Maybe at some point Oregon gets up into that group, Nebraska maybe, who knows. But as of right this second, those two games are the games for Penn State. And not having a whiteout on one of them just feels a little ridiculous to me. But it's one of the most pure forms of college football that we have, and the idea that we can't have it, on one of the biggest games of the weekend and have it be Penn State, Ohio State as a whiteout and market everything around that is a little bit crazy to me, and it feels like it's just kind of happening more out of circumstance rather than actually needing it to happen. So it's one of those very frustrating things where it feels like a lot of the traditions that we've lost over the last couple of years are, a little bit a sign of the times, right? It's kind of, becoming a little bit more about money and making your athletic budget work and all of that different type of stuff. This is a very fixable problem. This is a very fixable thing that we can keep this tradition alive, keep it special to the fans, and it seems like people, the powers that be at least, are not willing to do that. So definitely a very frustrating thing, something that you hope you can get figured out for absolutely, because it should be Ohio State against Penn State at night with a whiteout in State College. So hopefully that happens. But the other one that I want to talk about is the Army-Navy game. There is a ton going on around this game right now. There is a lot of big things that happen around this game pretty much every single year. It's usually that standalone weekend, right? It's Army-Navy right after conference championships end. It's kind of that buffer in between regular season football and postseason football, or at least bowl games and the playoff. And I love it that way. I think having it on its own day is a very special thing, and I think especially if they're not going to be considered for playoff consideration, they should absolutely have their own day. Well, that's not going to be the case this upcoming year. They will play the Celebration Bowl at 12 p.m. Eastern, and they will play the Camilla Bowl at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now, the Army-Navy game will happen at 3 p.m., so it doesn't necessarily affect it too much. I'm not necessarily, bemoaning this overly aggressively, and I'm not necessarily too mad about it, but it is kind of just one of those other traditions that feels like a very fixable problem. It feels like something that can absolutely be scheduled around. And on top of this, I think the Celebration Bowl should be standalone, and they shouldn't have people, going away from that to watch the Army-Navy game, because that's what they're going to do at 3 p.m. instead of finishing out that game, which is between the two HBCU schools. It's the only HBCU bowl game that we have. And the fact is, a lot of people are going to switch away from that game towards the end of it and watch the Army-Navy game as it, starts with all of the theatrics and everything. And I don't think that's necessarily fair to either of the games. So I think this is one of those where, frankly, it's likely not going to change too much of what that day is. But I just really like that day. I know it seems it might be a little bit childish, I'll be totally honest with you, but there is some of that energy that's college football. Having Army-Navy standalone on the day after conference championship games is something special, and it's something that is specific to college football and, brings a lot of college football fans together watching the exact same thing at the exact same time. And I think it's not necessarily that, the other two bowl games are ruining it by any means, or the other two bowl games should, do anything differently. It's just, I feel like this is a scheduling issue that absolutely could be handled. And I feel like it's somewhat of, for whatever reason, the powers that be, making these decisions and setting the schedule are not willing to just keep some of the things alone. Just leave them the way they are. It felt like it was happening with Texas OU, leaving possibly the State Fair in Dallas and moving over to Arlington to Jerry World. That was something that no Texas, no Oklahoma fan was ever on board for, but it was definitely getting talked about, and I'm sure it's still probably getting talked about in certain circles, although I don't think that's happening in the near future by any means. So it just feels like there are certain things that in this sport, especially in college football, where traditions mean so much and they're so important to all of the fans, that we got to be able to have certain things that are standalone, that have their own weekend like Army-Navy does, or that just have, that tradition behind them. And I think slowly but surely, a lot of stuff was taken from us all at once with some rivalries, with some regionality, with some of the, finer points of this game. And then and then they're slowly taking away all of the little, very specific special things. And the whiteout one, to me, is frankly the bigger one that I'm focused on, if I'm being totally honest. I think Army Navy is still going to be a very special event. I think when it stands alone, it's still going to be one of those things that, people are going to tune in, and that's not necessarily too much of an issue. I think it's still going to be a very special game. It's still going to be something that a lot of people watch, and I think it's going to be really, really cool. The whiteout is a thing that it is college football. It is as pure a form of college football as you will find across this country. It is as cool as it gets. It is one of the best atmospheres in the entire country across the last decade. So I think it's something that has to be fixed. I'm holding out a little bit of hope that they can figure it out and have that Penn State-Ohio State game be at night, be a whiteout game, and have everyone in State College just going absolutely crazy. But right now, it doesn't seem like it's going that way. So a very kind of frustrating turn of events, I think, with all of the things that are changing in college football, with all of the conference realignment and NIL and transfer portal and all of the stuff that we've had to get used to. I think some of this stuff is more important to us, and it's becoming more important as we get further and further down this road, because it shows what college football really is. The games like Georgia, Florida, the games like Texas OU being split down the middle at the 50-yard line, the Penn State whiteout, whatever it may be, the game up in Ann Arbor or in Columbus. Those are the special things about this game, and it feels like if we can't, just shuffle a couple of things around to make the whiteout what it should be, I don't know what we're doing. So it's a very frustrating turn of events. I think a lot of people, especially Penn State fans, are very, very frustrated with the whiteout. I'm sure there are people that are not too happy about the Army-Navy game, although I think they scheduled it in a way to where it can work. I just think it's a little bit frustrating that there is going to be the overlap of two games in particular, Army-Navy and the HBCU bowl game, that likely should have their own standalone spot. So that's kind of just a minor beef, I suppose, I have with the scheduling powers that be. But at the end of the day, traditions are a part of this sport, and I think the little ones are becoming that much more important, and we got to try to hold on to them as best we can. I know some of them are a little bit trivial, some of them are a little bit smaller than they seem, but at the end of the day, it is important. So we'll figure out, what's happening with the whiteout. Hopefully they figure that one out quickly, but we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about who actually won the transfer portal. There's a lot of talk around some big-time teams. They didn't necessarily end up on this ranking that CBS put out than I thought they would. So I want to break down it, go conference by conference, and break it all down for you guys right after this, so stick with us.